11 years ago, I had a company that was worth well over $120,000. After one call, 1 month, I had the company sold for $20,000. Why? Because I wanted to save my marriage. This video is a lesson, a hard lesson that I had to learn to set my priorities straight. I'll be pausing and looking around and trying to think because honestly, it's still pretty raw. Still pretty emotional. Still a heavy burden. Not that I sold the company, but that I was that kind of man in the first place. It all started in 2010. I got married, and then my father-in-law passed away, unfortunately, shortly after our wedding. My wife and I moved back to Chatham, and I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I was becoming an instructor for first aid and CPR, and so I thought, let's open up my own health and safety company. I applied. I did my first real business plan. This was my first official business. I had businesses as a child, and those are stories that don't matter. Anyways, I did the business plan. I came up with projections. I sent it out to Red Cross. And I said, this is what I plan on starting, a company called Initial Care. They accepted. They actually gave me some praise and feedback on my business plan, that it was really a well thought out business plan. They really appreciated my projections of being more realistic than a lot of what they see in their training partners. And they were hopeful for me. My startup for this company was about $2,000 for equipment and books, renting out a room, that kind of thing. And in less than 2 months, I was profitable. I was able to pay back all that money that I spent on the equipment and everything like that, and things were looking great. I was renting out conference rooms from hotels and running courses out of there. But what I didn't realize when I first started was that little bit of praise that Red Cross gave me for my business plan was the start of my ego. You see, I was already working for another guy that, as an instructor, who ran, and I still think is running, the largest training partner for the Canadian Red Cross. He was great to work with. I loved his company. I thought he did well. But when I was analyzing his company and what he did right, I also noticed that what I didn't like was his website. And so I thought I needed to put a lot more trust and effort into the website and make a better website, and I did. It was that small decision that really made my company thrive. Within less than 6 months, I was number one in Southwestern Ontario for the Canadian Red Cross training partners. And that was just the start of it. Within a year, I had 3 different locations. I was running courses in London and Sarnia and Chatham, with Chatham being my home base, and thinking that it was a smaller town. I didn't think I would get a lot of interest in it, but I was selling out courses every other week, and in the summers every week. I ran most of my courses on the weekends, but every now and then I did some courses throughout the week. But when I was at my peak, I was making about $10,000 profit a weekend. The ego, though, that held me back. Everyone thought that I was thriving and doing great, but my finances were a mess. If you're making $10,000 profit in a weekend, how do you not know where your money went? I kept reinvesting, and I don't think I provided much to my wife for our house or living expenses or anything like that. At that time, we didn't have any children, which praise God for that, because I wasn't the kind of man that could have raised children properly. I'm still really bad at finances, actually. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing 3 a.m. CEO, because I'm trying to solve all my problems in public and hopefully get your feedback and hopefully encourage you along the way on how to solve these problems that every business owner has when they first get started. Anyways, within those years, it was 5 years that I had that company. Excuse me. Within those 5 years, I continued to grow well. Contracts with the colleges to do first aid and CPR courses for them. And I kept growing more and more distant from my wife. You see, she's the kind of person that was raised that you work for somebody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. She's a hard worker. She's great at her job. She's making way more money than I am right now. And her path is great. But she didn't understand business. She was never raised in the business mindset. So when I tried to talk to her about business, or if I got discouraged about something, then I would talk to her about it, and I didn't like her way of receiving it. She would encourage me to do something else, go back to school, and a whole bunch of other things. And so right from the beginning, I pretty much cut her out of conversations about business and decisions about business. And that was my first major mistake. See, when you cut your wife out of something that's so major in your life, you can't really build a marriage around that. I lost trust with her that she could support me through it all, even though she kept trying. I feel that she was carrying the weight of the marriage herself. Over those 5 years, I was pretty lazy, pretty absent. I thought I built a pretty self-sustaining business. All my courses were full, but most of those courses were full when I was teaching. I had 5 or 6 instructors under me that would teach as well, but the reviews were always better when I taught. And that was getting draining every weekend doing the exact same first aid and CPR course. I made them fun and exciting, but when you're telling the same stories and same jokes every single weekend, then that's not for me. So about 4 years later, in 2014 now, nearing the end of 2014, I decided I wanted to sell my company. And I talked to my wife about it, and she was super supportive of it. She loved that idea. She thought that it was a great idea, that I built up a good company that's worth being sold. And then I talked to other people about it as well. And those people kept praising me. Dave, you built an amazing health and safety company. It's just small right now. You're making it bigger. It's growing. You're super successful. And I let that bloat my ego even more. So in January of 2015, I decided that I was going to get a contract for a storefront. Instead of renting out rooms from conference rooms, from hotels, I decided to get a storefront. And I thought this expansion idea was great. I would offer a lot more courses, and I did, and it was going well. But I sunk a lot of money into it. And pretty much everything that I had sitting in the bank at the time that I was not using to support my family. And I realized shortly afterwards, 3 months later, that I was still drained. I was checked out. The November, December before, my wife and I decided we should sell the company. It wasn't that long afterwards that I regretted my decision of getting a storefront, but I was locked in for a contract, so I was just trying to make my money back and push through. That's when I spoke to my wife, and we came up with a game plan that I was going to apply, go back to school. My dad was going through some health struggles, multiple bouts of cancer. Actually, no, he wasn't at the time. He was working a job that he didn't love. He was always into computers. He had a really successful business as a computer consultant, and he was having a hard time because he only has a grade 6 education getting a job locally. So because of that, and a quick Google search of what is the job that will allow you to problem solve the most, because I felt like problem solving was one of my gifts, came up as software developer. And so my plan was to go back to school as a software developer for 3 years. And after that, I could get a job and get my dad a job, hopefully in management. Get him in so that he can go back to doing something that he loved. Because I felt guilty. It's another story that I'm not going to get into, but for him, coming back to Ontario, I used to live in Alberta, and I moved with my sister, and my mom moved with us to support us. But my parents were still together, so they did long distance marriage for a while until my dad moved back. And I felt guilty about that, and still do. So I wanted to get him a job. So I decided I was going to go back to school as a software developer. In the meantime, to run my company, there was one instructor that was fantastic. Her name was Felicity, and she wanted more. She wanted to run more courses. She wanted to help me grow any way that she could. She was eager, the kind of employee anybody dreams of for a company. And so for a while, I made a deal with her that when I do go back to school, then I'm going to give her 25% of the company to manage everything and run everything. And she was happy with that. And it was just a verbal deal, nothing set in stone, but she was running it when I went back to school, or when I was about to go back to school. But the summer came, and I was still feeling stressed and overwhelmed and checked out, so checked out of that company. And then one day, well, I'm teaching a first aid course. We're in the middle of CPR, and a car drove right through the front of my building. There were literally thousands of pounds of concrete that shot through the office and hit the chairs where we were sitting moments ago. But I believe that God protected me, and God protected everybody in that first aid course. And we were in the back of the office doing CPR at the time. So the first aid course turned into a real crash course, pun intended, of how to actually handle a first aid and CPR situation. So I did what I was trained to do and went out and took care of the situation, got someone to call 911, and everyone was okay. A car that crashed through my building, he was uncontrolled diabetic. He didn't have control over his diabetes, and he was having a diabetic emergency and just lost consciousness. But he was okay too in the end. That was the last straw. I went home that day and I got bit by a bat, which is random. A bat got in our house and bit me. And so then all that together, I was like, I'm done. I'm done with initial care. I'm over this. My marriage isn't doing well. The stress is eating me alive. And I need to figure out my priorities. So as you can tell, I haven't really talked about God too much other than thanking him for safety. But I never put God in my business. I never set him as my foundation. And over the next week, I sat down and wrote out my priorities, or what I wanted my priorities to be. And it was God first, my wife second, and my career third. And I realized I needed to, in order to keep my marriage, I needed to get rid of the thing that was causing the biggest division between the two of us. And that was my company. Because of cutting her out, holding animosity because she didn't understand my business decisions, my ego. I thought I was the best business owner in the world because it was so successful so quick. Within less than a month, I called up the guy that I used to teach for, which we were still friends, and I handed him some jobs, he handed me some jobs, that kind of thing. I helped him out in pinches, and I asked if he wanted to buy me out because he didn't have a location in the Chatham area. He hasn't made it down that far yet, and he was interested, and he asked for my evaluation, and I said I actually got a secondary opinion, and it was worth over $120,000. So I told him that, and he literally laughed in my face. I told him my story, and I said, make me an offer that you can do then. I sent him all my financials, my crummy financials, not in order. The only way that I was able to get taxes done was because my wife would come through for me and put me in my place and help me over a course of 3 weeks before tax season to actually do all my taxes for the whole year. Anyways, he came back after seeing all that and offered $20,000. And without hesitation, I said, okay, let's do it. And within less than a month, we had a contract done and handing over the keys to the front office, which was now fixed. And I was out of initial care. 11 years later, to this day, he's still running first aid courses in this area. My regret is not selling my company to save my marriage, which it did, very much so. I was able to prioritize better. I was able to go back to school. I was able to graduate. I was able to get a good job. And then the kids came, and I feel like I'm prioritized and on par with what I want. I often still struggle with my priorities being in proper order. And that's why 3 a.m. CEO is so in your face about my priorities, because it's grounding me and reminding me that it is God first, my wife second, my children third, my career fourth, and business last. Anyways, back to my regret. I regret selling the business the way that I did. If I know what I know now, I would have sold it to my instructor, Felicity, under seller finance, but I didn't consider her because I didn't realize that I could do such a thing. I just wanted that quick out. Selling it to her would have made me a little bit more money, which, again, I could care less about the money part. But it would have set her up to be a little more successful. She would have made more money in the end. She would have done a great job with it. Instead, I just closed everything up, wiped my hands clean, gave her a check for $5,000 and said, thank you for 3 months of work. I feel guilty about that still because she was worth a lot more than $5,000. And to this day, I still have guilt about that. And I still hope one day that I get enough money that I can track her down and give her a large sum of money as a great big thank you, because she helped me out through a really hard time. The lesson that I learned about selling my company is, one, it's easier to sell a company than I thought, especially when you're giving it away for a fraction of what it's worth. But the lesson that I really learned about this all was priorities. It is hard to keep your priorities centered when you're working so hard on a goal. It is hard keeping the ones that you love first. and not neglecting them, which I did. Anyways, if you listened to this whole story, thank you very much for listening. I encourage you to drop a comment down below and tell me, what are you working on? Or what are your priorities that you don't want to neglect? You are loved. Peace.